Now on BBC Radio 4, it's time for this week's Profile. Edward Stourton looks at the career of one of the country's most influential women.
Harry's drugs shame.
Bonkers Bruno locked up.
TV Deaton's drugs romp with Vice Girl.
The world of tabloid journalism is notoriously brutal and macho. This week's Profile is devoted to someone who conquered it and became its queen with astonishing speed.
For the first time ever, The Sun, Britain's most popular daily newspaper, has appointed a female editor. Rebekah Wade, the current editor of the News of the World, has been picked to take over from David Yelland, who's run the paper.
Rebekah Brooks, as she became following a second marriage, courts power but fights shy of publicity. The phone hacking scandal at Rupert Murdoch's News International, of which she's now the chief executive, has put her on the back foot and in the public eye.
She's one of the most powerful people in this country, essentially, because she is Rupert Murdoch's proxy here. And yet we have very little idea of her as a person and what she's like and how she's got there.
The commentator Henry Porter, who's written extensively about the power of the Murdoch press. The sense of mystery he describes certainly applies to Rebekah Brooks' youth. We know she was at school in Cheshire, but really very little else about her teenage years has been published. We managed to track down a childhood friend who says the young Rebekah Wade was like a sister because their families were so close. Louise Weir, as she then was, says the Wades were enthusiastic churchgoers and prosperous. The proceeds of the family tree surgery business meant enviable holidays and a personalised number plate for Mrs. Wade. The future tabloid editor was a keen campaigner for the Tory party and, intriguingly, apparently enjoyed watching people with binoculars. As to her teenage tastes...
She was really into her clothes and she liked quite alternative music. She was into things like the Cramps and music like that, quite alternative music. She was kind of maybe more emotionally intelligent. I don't think academically she was as strong, but it was obvious that she was going to get places in life. You know, there'd be fallout with friends, like there are at school, and then if she needed something from that person, she'd be able to sweet-talk them round. She's been very charming, and she's always been able to get what she wants out of people, even if they don't really like her. She's always been able to get what she wants.
It's also sometimes said these days that she can show a real temper sometimes. Did you see any sign of that?
Yeah, she's a typical Gemini. She's got her lovely fluffy side and then her angry side.
Rebekah Brooks' startlingly brief and opaque Who's Who entry mentions time at the Sorbonne, but not whether she took a degree. And colleagues at her first serious job in journalism remember her appearing as suddenly and mysteriously as a genie from a lamp.
It was never fully explained to me exactly what her role was.
Graham Ball was the features editor on Eddie Shah's famously short-lived Post newspaper when the 20-year-old Rebekah approached him in its Warrington offices.
She came up to me and said, "I'm going to come and work with you on the features desk as the features secretary or administrator." I said, "Well, I'm afraid that's not going to be possible because next week I'm going to London," and I thought nothing more of it. The following Monday, I got to our new office in London, and there she was. She saw the way that the ideas were kicked into shape on the features desk, and then the story would be given to a feature writer on the paper. And after a while, she'd go and talk to the writer and ask, "Well, who is it you're phoning now? And who are you going to phone next?" And she'd learn in that way very quickly how to balance a story, who to speak to, how to assemble the facts. She was a bit of a puzzle to most of the old hands on the paper because we didn't see many people like her. Subsequently, haven't seen many people like her, actually. She charmed all the writers. Nobody said, "Oh, what is that woman doing?" or "Tell her to stop doing this." She did everything with a great finesse. It was very, very clever, actually.
Graham Ball witnessed early evidence of her tabloid touch. At a meeting of the features team one Friday, she mentioned a French beer, which, it was claimed, enhanced male sexual prowess.
The following Monday, we went into work, and she was always the first one there. And by the features desk were a number of crates of this beer. Unknown to us and unasked, she'd taken herself off to France that weekend, bought several crates of this beer and brought it back, and there it was. And she wrote the feature, it went very well, and we offered the crates of beer to the readers as a competition prize, and it was brilliant, and it was all her own work.
When the Post folded, Rebekah Wade moved to the News of the World. She made her mark very quickly indeed. The former Mirror editor Roy Greenslade met her just a couple of years after she joined the News International team at Wapping in London.
I remember being in the canteen at Wapping in 1991, saw an old friend from the News of the World. She said to me, look, here's Rebekah Wade, she said, who undoubtedly is going to be the next editor of the News of the World. She was at the time editor of the News of the World magazine. And in a way that was quite strange because Rebekah's always tipped for the next job when she gets the job, so that when she became editor of the News of the World, I was immediately told she'll be the next editor of The Sun. And then when she was editor of The Sun, I was quickly told, she'll be moving up the hierarchy into management. She used to occasionally ring up and take counsel from me on the days when I was less combative towards News International generally. And that's, in a way, how she operates. She encourages you to feel that you're on her team, you're on her side. She'd say, what should I do about this? How would I handle that? And, of course, once you've given that kind of advice, you are much less likely to ever be critical of her.
When Rebekah Wade took the editor's chair at the News of the World in 2000, she was the youngest editor of a British national newspaper. Not long after her appointment, 8-year-old Sarah Payne was murdered by Roy Whiting.
Named and shamed.
Amid the public outcry that followed, Rebekah Wade launched a name and shame campaign against convicted child sex offenders. She was even tempted into a rare interview on the BBC programme Breakfast with Frost.
Editor of the paper. Rebekah, starting with this Sunday and what's in the papers today, this occasion you're printing paedophiles that the police would like to know where they are, and police ask you to do this particular set. Is that right?
That's correct. I mean, there are about 110,000 paedophiles, convicted paedophiles that live in Britain at the moment, in England and Wales. The fact is that if you have paedophiles in society that are monitored, they will strike again. And my point is, if the police cannot monitor them, then it is only right and fair if you have a family with 3 young children and they put Roy Whiting next to you, then you have a general right to know that, to protect your children.
The campaign was blamed for encouraging people to take the law into their own hands, and one chief constable called it grossly irresponsible. But Roy Greenslade defends her motivation.
I think she can be wayward in her campaigns, but nevertheless they come from the heart. I don't think they're cynical. Certainly, I remember everyone thought, oh God, she's launched this name and shame in order to boost circulation. Well, I happen to know that they reduced the number of copies published that week because they thought it wouldn't be successful. So she didn't do it as a cynical act.
Rebekah Wade's stint as editor of the News of the World brought her into contact with the senior Labour politician John Prescott for the first time. The paper turned up the fact that his wife Pauline had given up a child for adoption when she was a teenager, and Rebekah Wade got in touch with the then Deputy Prime Minister. Lord Prescott says he was impressed, even though there was later a row over the way the story was handled by others at News International.
They then intended to publish this story. I managed to appeal to them not to do so until my wife and son had got together and they could discuss whether they wanted to be public about it. That was agreed. And though I met her then, she seemed very reasonable, very professional, and agreed to that proposition.
Rebekah Wade moved to the editor's chair at The Sun in 2003. Not long afterwards, she appeared before the Commons Committee on Culture, Media and Sport, and what she said under questioning from MPs has haunted her to this day. You'll hear her successor at the News of the World, Andy Coulson, trying to rescue her.
It's just the one element of whether you ever pay the police for information.
Yeah. We have paid the police for information in the past, and it's been...
And will you do it in the future?
We
operate within the code and within the law, and if there's a clear public interest, then the same holds for private detectives, for subterfuge, for video bags, whatever you want to talk about.
It's illegal for police officers to receive payments.
No, we don't. As I said, within the law.
I would say that she's not a particularly good performer in public. I mean, she's not the sort of person who would go on to Question Time.
Henry Porter.
And when she did go in front of the Parliamentary Committee, she made a complete pig's ear of it. She's obviously charming, she's obviously extremely adept politician and good at getting on with people. But when it comes to being in the public eye and actually having to think on your feet, I don't think perhaps she's that good or hasn't had that much practice, we can't say that.
Last week, Rebekah Brooks wrote to the Media Committee to say that she'd only been talking in general terms. This week, it was confirmed the police are considering a criminal investigation. A couple of years into the new job at The Sun, her marriage to the EastEnders actor Ross Kemp put her on the front pages again.
At the couple's home in South London, Rebekah Wade was arrested in the small hours of this morning for allegedly assaulting her husband. As photographers gathered outside, she was released from Wandsworth Police Station without charge. Ross Kemp was reportedly nursing a cut lip.
She has never lost her temper with me, and I've never seen her lose her temper, but of course by reputation she does have a temper, and other people tell me that when her paper missed a big story, or when she felt that there was not enough going on positively in the office, she could be extremely angry and not be afraid to show it.
And some people are quite frightened of her, are they not?
Well, of course, one of the interesting things about journalism and journalists is that you can get your own back in your newspaper without necessarily showing your temper and your level of anger. But it's quite clear that if you cross Rebekah, then you may be punished for it.
If the childhood temper seems to have survived into adulthood, so too has the childhood ability to charm. Roy Greenslade again.
It's amazing how she can do this, because she can cross all the lines. I mean, she could be as friendly with Alistair Campbell and his whole family, and Tony Blair and Cherie, and David Cameron and his wife. I mean, she just is able to do that without, I think, ever pausing for breath. It's a mixture of the steel and the charm which really has moved her onwards. I've never known anyone get as really close to Rupert and really charm him in the way that she has done.
The editor's chair at two mass circulation newspapers and a close relationship with Rupert Murdoch put Rebekah Wade at the heart of power, and not everyone liked what she did with her position.
When I used to be dealing with Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, the one used to complain to me that they had certain messages of what, say, Tony Blair had heard Gordon Brown had said, and I'd ask, how did he get that? He said, well, he'd had a dinner with Rebekah Wade or Rebekah Brooks. And when I go to Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, they would both quote her as the person that had given them that information. And I used to say to the two of them, for God's sake, how can this woman have that kind of influence? Don't you think perhaps she's playing you off? And that's the kind of relationship she had. I see she's continuing it with Cameron. And it's this idea that news executives, in a way, can influence the people at the top on the basis, I believe, that they're important in winning the next election. And that's where that influence comes from.
Rebekah Brooks is said to enjoy riding in the Oxfordshire countryside with David Cameron, and she invited the Prime Minister to her Christmas party. Her colleague and friend Andy Coulson was appointed as the Prime Minister's press secretary after the election. All very much in the best Murdoch tradition, according to Henry Porter.
The Murdoch Empire, always thought to be basically a conservative organisation, actually is remarkably adaptable to politicians' views, and actually doesn't have a very strong ideological presence or presentation when they're talking to politicians. So she can flip from one to the other because it doesn't really matter. What's interesting to the Murdoch Corporation and her is power. Who's got the power, who's about to get it. And so she will adapt to any circumstances in order to further the organisation's commercial interests.
But the phone hacking scandal has become a real threat to the interests of the Murdoch Empire and its influence. It cost Andy Coulson his job at Number 10. It could cost News International millions of pounds in compensation to victims, and there was another arrest this week. All of this is happening as Rupert Murdoch tries to secure his control of the profitable broadcaster B-Sky B. James Murdoch, Rupert's son, has been called to New York to work with his father, leaving Rebekah Brooks to handle the crisis alone. The enemies of the Murdoch Empire smell blood.
Profile was presented by Ed Stourton. The producers were Fiona Woods and Ben Crichton.